So I'm going to talk about the UNGAS and what was my role and the role of different civil society organizations after the UNGAS. So I don't know to what extent everybody here is familiar with that. But the UNGAS is the United Nations General Assembly Special Session. I'm not going to go in details of how it works within the different UN system, because I think that Jamie is talking about it at some point. But just to mention in a nutshell that the UNGAS is the highest possible assembly of the United Nations, and the only one where all the member states have an equal representation. And they decide on special assemblies on specific topics when there is a request from a majority of member states. So back then, few years back, some countries started to ask about the need to have an UNGAS on drugs after nearly 20 years. Some countries were calling for reform around drug policies. There were some European countries that were asking for more humane a more humane approach, much more grounded in public health. There were also some countries within Latin America who were asking more, who were questioning the whole prohibition model. So that is the reason why the UNGAS could be held, because there was a majority of states who really requested it. So the good thing also is that these countries also asked for the inclusion of civil society around the debates before the UNGAS, and that's why they created the Civil Society Task Force. So basically it's a task force of different civil society organizations, 26 members altogether, and the different members on the task force were the mission of the task force was really to act as a link between the United Nations and the civil society in the preparatory process before the UNGAS. So who were part of the UNGAS? So there are some representatives of affected population. When we talk about affected population, there are representatives, it's a very large scope. There were representatives of farmers, of reform users, of active users, palliative care, family, the young, etc., etc. So all of these were represented. Global approaches were represented, so harm reduction, penal reform system, also the prevention aspect were also there, and there were regional representatives. So there were two representatives per region. So you can see the picture. You can see I'm just right at the bottom there. So I was one of the representatives for the African region. So what we did like a consultation in about 10 countries within the African region. So the UNGAS was held then. Oh, it's interesting to say that the last consultation that we had before the UNGAS was actually here at the previous conference, South Africa Drug Policy Conference, and I know that some people in the room were part of this consultation. So after that there was the UNGAS, and after the UNGAS there was the outcome document. So basically, and I know also that Jamie will be talking about the positive aspect and more a bit negative aspect of the UNGAS document, but basically it's an outcome document signed by all member states where they take the engagement of doing such and such thing as per the recommendation of the document. So how is it interesting for the civil society in Africa, but not only in Africa? The thing is that in all the different drug policies that are being shaped in Africa and elsewhere are now supposed to be in line with the principles of the outcome document of the UNGAS, because this is a responsibility, a commitment that they took. But how it's more important for the African continent is that when we compare our region when we take our region compared to other regions of the world, we can see that we have been lagging behind in terms of drug policy drug policy reform advocacy. And the UNGAS has been an opportunity to advocate around this. And I will take some examples to show concretely how civil society have been able to build up on the UNGAS, but also just to note that different countries have at different level of discussion in their country, and the national context also have to be taken into consideration. And if one organization has an advocacy activity around that, it might not be suitable for a different country within the region. So the first thing that there were different things that was done by different organizations, but I would like to talk about one event that we had in East Africa. So there was a meeting in Arusha that was organized by Kanko. It was in November last year. And so the opportunity, we took the opportunity to remind the MPs, or well, some were reminded and some were even made aware of the commitments taken by their country around the UNGAS. And I can also, well, there was a declaration that was signed by the different members of parliament of different East African countries that were there. And also, there is in the making a policy, East African policy on harm reduction that is being led by Kanko, and IDPC is helping in the process. So this policy it's a harm reduction policy that we would like the East African community to adopt, and it's based on the UNGAS recommendation on some aspect of the document. And this is more on the regional level. So, and now what did different organizations do more at a national level? I'll take the couple of examples. So Mexico was a good example because civil society organization, the representative of the government, of the the UN family, the experts, etc., just came together and discussed about the outcome document of the UNGAS, and specifically how to put into practice these recommendations. How can they be put in practice through policies, through services, through programs, etc., etc. So it's a very tangible thing. I would like to talk more also on an action that was done more at the African level, so in Liberia, by some civil society organization who are, by the way, who should be present in the room. So there were FADCA, and there was the West African Drug Policy Network. So they sent a letter to the president of the Liberia to urge her to align national policies and practices with the UNGAS document in terms of human rights, health, alternative to incarceration, etc., etc. And what is quite interesting with this example is that they took some very concrete example. Look how things are happening in your country. Look at the commitment that you took at the UNGAS, and there is a problem here. So, and then they made a list of recommendations. Oh, sorry. Now it comes. I'm also going to talk about Mauritius. This is where I come from. So in Mauritius, what we did, first of all, we held the government accountable in his non-participation at the UNGAS. Because the thing is that before the UNGAS, we tried to engage with our government. We sent the position paper of civil society on the UNGAS, and we tried to ask them, let us meet and discuss about this. They never reply, and nobody was sent there. So you can see there's a picture with Mauritius and an empty seat. So this picture was, I put it on my Facebook when I was at the UNGAS last year, and different media took the picture, and it was kind of a buzz, and there were also some representative of the government that were questioned about that by the media. And but on a more positive aspect, what we did also after the UNGAS is that we organized a workshop with the members of parliament to talk about drug policy and also about the UNGAS and the recommendations of the UNGAS. So I have to say that it was mostly the members of the opposition party who came, But it was a good way of sharing with these MPs. And what's quite interesting is that a little bit later, maybe a few weeks later, there was one of the members of parliament who was there at our workshop. He went for a private notice question at the parliament around the young gas and the recommendation around the young gas and the role of the country. And it was quite funny because this member of parliament called me and was like, oh, I want to ask a question at the young gas, so how should I phrase it, etc. And maybe a week later, somebody from the Minister of Health calls me and like, okay, I know that you've been at the young gas. How is it? What is it exactly? So it was quite funny because I was giving some advice on how the question should be asked in the parliament, but also giving some advice on what the answer should be, how the answer should be given in the parliament. But of course, the Ministry of Health decided to put things his own way. That's how things work. So what we did after this, the discussions around the UNGAS went through the parliament. We sit down with the Hansard to see all the discussion that they had in the parliament, and then we wrote press article just to state the facts in a more factual way, because a lot of things were just I can't find no words to say how politicians sometimes just talk about drugs in a parliament when nobody's supposed to hear them. So that's about it. And the impact, if we can talk about the impact, and I want to say that the impact is not only around the young gas, but also the drug policy activities that have been done in the country before and after the young gas. So we were invited as civil society organization on a public panel to talk about cannabis decriminalization. It might seem very weak for you, for people from America, because it's something that probably happened quite often. But in our country, it was the first time that there was a public panel around the cannabis decriminalization. And we were invited to talk on this panel. And it was interesting because we took this opportunity to talk about the decriminalization of cannabis, and also with a broader perspective of drug policy reform as a whole. So following this debate, there was also the leader of the opposition who supported us and said publicly that we needed to have a discussion about cannabis policy reform. Maybe it's something that we've heard quite often, but we never heard a leader of the opposition saying it. So for us, things are moving slowly, but hopefully surely. And I would like also to mention another impact, and this one maybe we would not expect this, but we've been having also support from prominent religious leaders on drug policy reform, and it was very encouraging for us. I would not like to go too much in details on the activities that we had in the country, because Kunal, my colleague from Mauritius, will be talking about it tomorrow, but just in a nutshell. So to conclude, I would just talk about few maybe take-home messages, or also my views around because I was involved in the process before the UNGAS. So sometimes it is a challenge to hear voices of drug policy reform and harm reduction movement in some countries of the region. Because I would like to say that when we had the consultation before the UNGAS, there were two representatives for each region. Generally speaking, one was had more of a prohibitionist perspective, and the other one was more harm reduction, drug policy, or both. So when we did these meetings in Africa, the thing is that the other side, they were very connected, the network was very strong, and they managed to make people of the same perspective meet together, and there was not much representative of the other side, the voices of the other side, to be able to push for policy reform or harm reduction. And I think it's quite funny, because even at the UNGAS, there was an African Union position. We've been talking about it already. But even this position was not heard by the Africa group. So it's like a group of 11 people who represent the region at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs and at the UNGAS also. So even the position of the African Union, which was quite progressive, was not really taken into consideration by the Africa group at the CND. And also, what I found out is that it is not very clear for some civil society organization and some community-based organization, how to advocate around the UNGAS outcome document and the UNGAS itself now. And I would like, on a more positive note, and I'm ending on that because I know that my time is up. My time is up, right? But more on, I think that it's a more positive point that there are now some regional advocacy opportunities. We know that there's a West African Commission on Drugs. There are also some funding on the Eastern Africa for advocacy around drug policy and harm reduction. So I think that it's really important that we can capitalize on all these different opportunities and have an African response, or maybe several African responses, because what's happening in Western Africa is different from here or from the islands. But we need to have responses as civil society in parallel with what the global advocacy movement is going to do, is already doing. Thank you very much.